guys, so this is the homemade chicken broth that I made the other day, and if you'll notice, this is still very liquidy, and there's not much fat up on the top at all. I'll skim that a little bit. I might even strain it again. But I was reading up as to why, because a lot of times when you see people make homemade chicken broth, you'll see the layer of fat at the top. And I was reading up on mine. Oh, that's my oven telling me it's ready. As I was reading up on it, I used a chicken carcass instead of the actual chicken because I just used my leftover carcass from the roasted chicken I made in a previous dinner. And that's considered, I believe, more of a bone broth. I did add the vegetables and herbs into this. But because of that, and I wasn't cooking it with the chicken and the skin layer and all that fat in there, that's why this hasn't really solidified. And there's not a bunch of fat on top, which is totally fine. Bone broths are extremely healthy, so no big deal. If you do the same as me and you make yours from a carcass and you're like, well, why didn't it gel up like everybody else's? That's the reason why, and that's perfectly normal. So I'm going to get this in my big stock pot over here. I gotta heat this up, let this come to a boil before we start getting into the process of packing it into our hot jars. So let's get going on that. Okay, you guys, let's talk about some of the things you're going to need to do your canning. So, of course, I've got my jars here. You probably wonder why I have them sitting in the oven. I just washed them in hot soapy water. And to keep your jars warm, whenever you are canning and you're going to, what's called hot pack something, put something very hot into your jars need to stay hot as well. Now, you could run these through your dishwasher and just leave them sitting in there in that heat until you're ready to use them. I had just done a load in the dishwasher, so I didn't want to do another one just for these 4.5 jars. So I washed them, and I have my oven set on 200 degrees, and I'm just going to let these heat up in here for about 20 minutes and then shut the oven off, but leave my jars in here so they're going to be ready for me whenever I'm ready to start packing stuff into them. Forgive me, I know it's a little dark in here, but these are my lids, the screw tops, and the round lid part that will suction down on your jar once they have pressure cooked. I put these in some simmering boiling water, and again I'm just going to let those this is going to sanitize your lids for you, and then just leave them in the simmering hot water and they'll be ready to go whenever you're ready to put them on your lid. This is my pressure canner, and I have the right amount of water that my book tells me that I need to start heating up in there. I'm just kind of bring that to a simmer, get that good and hot. And you'll have to look according to what your own book tells you to do on your pressure canner. Now I have this, it's a Presto cooker canner. This is I'm sure an older model. I think a good friend got me this canner years and years ago, and I've been using it. I love it. And it's worked great for me. Just make sure you maintain it properly. But whatever canner you're using, make sure you have the manual. Refer back to your pressure canner manual to know how much water and what are your instructions for utilizing your canner. Of course, this is the top of my canner. You can see this is my pressure gauge here, and this I'm going to be trying to get that to focus in, watching very closely. I don't want it to go above 10 pounds of pressure. And then this is going to be my little steam gauge here. This is going to start jiggling and wiggling once it comes up to pressure. You want to make sure you've got your little jar clamp here, and that's just for handling the hot jars, getting them in and out of your pressure canner without burning yourself. This is a little magnetic thing here, that's for your hot lids. You can just dip that down and get your hot lids right out of that hot water without burning yourself. And of course your funnel, you want a wide mouth funnel. It's going to sit right down in your jars, and that way you get your handy dandy ladle. You can ladle your soup right into the hot jars. Makes it very simple. And then I've got vinegar sitting out here. I'm going to wipe my rims with this vinegar before I pack it, just as an extra cleansing step and sanitizing step before I start pressure cooking my soup.
Okay, so at this point, my chicken stock has come back up to a simmer. I actually did low boil mine, which I read after the fact. For a clearer broth, you do actually want to simmer it, but it's no big deal. It's not going to affect the flavor, just the look. So now I am packing the chicken stock into my hot jars. I have my funnel sitting right down at the top of my hot jar. and just using my ladle to fill that up, I'm going to leave a 1-inch headspace, it's called, and that's basically just filling it up to that very bottom rim on the jar. And now I am dipping a clean washcloth in my vinegar, and I'm just wiping around the top and sides of my lids before I put the lids on and screw them down. Not too tight, but just tight enough to where they're secure. And you can see I'm using my handy dandy magnet to put the lids on top, and then I will screw those down. And now that everything is filled up, I am using my jar clamp, and very carefully I'm going to set those down inside my canner that is good and hot. I do have the little basket that sits inside the canner. You want to always make sure that you have that inside. You don't want that sitting directly on the bottom of your canner, or your jars will break. And now, having read according to my pressure canner instructions, I first had to let the steam come out of the vent in the back and let that go for 7 to 10 minutes, just to make sure you get all your air bubbles out. And then I am bringing my canner up to 10 pounds of pressure. Now you can see it's just a tad bit over that. I've read that if it goes 1 pound over or under at any given time, it's not a huge deal. Maybe some people might gasp at that, but I'm working with an electric stove, and it's really hard sometimes to keep it right on that 10 pounds. But 10 pounds of pressure, and I had to let it go for 25 minutes for my quart jars. Once that's finished, I turn the oven off. I let that come all the way back down to 0, and once the gauge goes back down to 0, then I can take my pressure gauge off in the back and carefully open up my lid. And here I have my beautiful jars of homemade chicken stock. I did make 3 quarts and 1 pint because as I was transferring my original chicken stock to heat it up on the stove, of course I had to spill some, so I didn't quite get 4 quarts, but that's fine. I just carefully took those out. I'm going to let these cool and sit there overnight. You should hear a popping sound eventually. Sometimes you'll hear it right away, sometimes not till later, but that is the lid sealing. So you want to check your lids after a while. Push down on them. There should not be any give. It should be completely sealed. If it did not seal, I would put that in your refrigerator and use it, within the next week or so. But if it does seal, then these are good to go for a year or more, some people say, on your canning shelf. And before I store my jars, I will wash them off with some hot soapy water, and you can take off the screw lid at this point when you go to store your jars. Label them, the date, and of course what it is. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I think it's a very simple process. It's just understanding your canner and making sure you have your instruction manual to know, you're following all of the instructions for your particular canner. So hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.